What is going on, everyone? Welcome back to another Swift tutorial. In today's video, we're going to be learning how to set up an in-app purchase. So basically what you see here, we have our price, our image, and then we have this buy button. So unfortunately, in-app purchases can't be tested on a simulator, but we're going to go through all the semantics of registering a product with Apple, fetching the product from Apple, being able to handle different transaction states like purchasing, purchased, restoring, failed, etc. And you'll basically get a very good bird's eye overview of how the basics of in-app purchases work. So that being said, make sure you smash that like button down below. If you're new to the channel, welcome. If you're returning, welcome back. Get Xcode ready, get excited, and let's get into it. So let's get started by creating a new Xcode project. We're going to stick with our single view application. Let's call this project IAP example. Save it on our desktop, and let's get into it. Let me expand this Xcode window a little bit to give ourselves some more room to work. So the first thing we want to actually do is come up here and go to this tab, and we want to add the capability for in-app purchases to our app. So let's hit this little plus for capabilities and search for in-app purchase, and we can double click it and you'll see a new row gets added here. This basically adds an entitlement under the hood that is required for in-app purchases to work. The next thing we want to do before getting into the code is actually set up the in-app purchase product in Apple's portal. So Apple requires that you set everything up on their portal because they review and approve different in-app purchases. So I've actually gone ahead and created this application instance, so this iOS Academy tutorial test app. And if you're not familiar with this website, it's appstoreconnect.apple.com. It's the portal we use to submit apps. So the first thing that we need to do in here is match our bundle ID string to the one that we have entered here. And you can see it's the one down here. And the reason these need to match is because we're going to fetch products that are approved in our application portal, and the identifier for your app is used to map the request. So let's come into here, delete this, and paste in the bundle ID. So that's step one. The next thing we're going to do is go to features, and we want to actually register in-app purchases. So let's hit this plus, and you'll get these different types of in-app purchase products we can have. And they're pretty self-explanatory, but just to run through them pretty fast. We have consumable products like, let's say, coins in a game like Candy Crush. There's no limit to how many you can buy. Non-consumable, which is what we're going to be doing, is something you can purchase once. So let's say something like removing ads. Then auto-renewing and non-auto-renewing subscriptions, which would be like a subscription to like Tinder, for example. So let's do non-consumable, create it. And we want to first give it an identifier, just a reference name. So remove ads. The product ID is going to be let's do iOS Academy.test.remove ads. So this is just convention for how you should name them. It's not really a hard to find rule. Let's give this a price of 99 cents. Let's also give it a display title and description. And you can give this information in multiple localizations and languages. Generally, if you have this in the language of the user that they can read, it'll result in, of course, more purchases. And I think that's everything we need to finish here and fill out. This information down here is not needed for development. This is needed for App Store review purposes when you submit. And this is needed optionally if you want to promote the purchase in the App Store. So let's hit save, and we can actually dig into the code once this decides to save and stop being slow. Still saving. Okay, it finally saved. Actually, just kidding, it didn't save. Looks like we hit an error. Let's try that again. Okay, so let me actually change this because I've used this before. So let's drop the S and just make it remove add. So let's do save one more time. Okay, cool. So it's saved. If we come back here and reload the page, because Apple's websites never work, we should see our in-app purchase in the list of products now. So there it is. So cool, let's actually go to the code and put this together. So we're gonna need a couple things. The first thing we're gonna need is a screen, aka another view controller where we can do all the purchase stuff. We're gonna need to fetch the product itself from Apple. We're gonna have to handle the purchase. And we should also probably save to disk that the user has unlocked an item. So when they open the app the next time, they still have access to it. So we'll also do that. So let's create an IB action in here. And when the user taps a given button, we're going to show the upgrade screen. So did tap, remove ads. Let's let a view controller from the storyboard. So we're going to instantiate a view controller with an identifier of, let's call it upgrade. And let's say else return. And then we can say navigation controller push VC animated true. And we're going to say the title for this view controller will be remove ads. Let's actually create this view controller and do some setup in our storyboard. So right click that, new file, Cocoa Touch class. We want a subclass of a view controller, and we're going to call this UI view controller, upgrade view controller. Let's create it. Get rid of this code, this template code that we get. Now let's go to our storyboard. And in our storyboard, we're going to do a little bit of setup. So make sure your storyboard is selected here and not your launch screen. I've seen some folks use this instead, and they're two very different things. But let's first start by selecting the view controller, coming up here and going to Editor, Embed in Navigation Controller, which gives us this bar up here. Let's select it and give it a title of Home. And let's add a bar button item to the bar here. Let's zoom in a smidge and call this remove ads. Let's connect our IB action to this button, like so. Next, we want to bring in another view controller, which is going to represent our upgrade screen. And I just call it an upgrade screen for the sake of my own sanity, just because I've called that type of flow that for like 10 years at this point. But it's basically just a screen where you're going to make purchases. So let's select that controller and give the class name as upgrade view controller, which is a new file we created. And the storyboard ID will be upgrade. And on the screen, we are going to want a button to actually buy the product. So let's select this and find a button, drop it in, and let's make this button look a little nicer so people are actually enticed to select it and purchase our product. So let's give a blue background color to the button, and let's change the tint to be white. And let's actually also change the text on it to be buy now. And finally, we want to add some constraints by selecting it, coming down here. And let's give it constraints of 20, 20, 10, and a height of 52. Cool, so we have a nicer looking button now. So let me go create a IB action in here that's gonna get triggered when we press that buy button. So did tap buy. And let's go back to the storyboard and connect that IB action. So let's select this, right click, drag from this IB action to our button. And we want to select touch up inside. And for the sake of this video being an example, I'm going to drag in a static image and text, which is going to show our basically image to unlock, remove ads, and the label will show the price. In a real app, you probably want these things to have outlets so you can configure them, but we only have one product, so this should definitely suffice for the video. So let me add some constraints if I can select it properly. We're going to say 10, 10, 10, and height will be 300. And let's give this an image of, I think lock is one of them. That's not what we want. Let's see, what images do we want? So we're going to use this one. This is not a great image for this type of purchase. You should have something that indicates remove ads, but again, for the purposes of this video, this is good enough. Let's drop in a label, and let's give this some constraints too. It's 10, 10, 10, 10, and we are going to center this, and we're also going to bump the font size. So let's select this and make this bold or semi-bold. Let's also bump up the font size. And let's double tap or double click and put the price there. So when you actually fetch the product, which we're going to do in a second, you'll actually get the localized price. So for example, if your user is in Europe using your app, you probably don't want to show your price in dollars. So you actually want to use the price that the product is getting from Apple's fetch response. It just makes it more streamlined for the user, and I also think it makes it more likely for them to purchase this, and it's in their own currency. So let me actually go to the code now, and let's put this together. So we want a function which is going to fetch the product. So let's create a function called fetch products. So I copied the name of the product when we created it in the portal. So that's what the name was. We want to import the framework that Apple gives us to deal with purchasing stuff, which is StoreKit. We want to call this fetch products function. We want to have a property on here, which is my product, and it's a SK product. And once we fetch the product successfully, we'll assign it to this. So to fetch a product, we're going to simply say request is SK product request, and you initialize it with a set of product IDs, which is what we copied here. Then we want to set the delegate for the request. Lastly, in here, we want to actually call start on the request. So this delegate will start complaining because we haven't actually conformed to it. Add the conformance. So up here, we can simply put a comma and say SK product request delegate. And the other thing we're going to need to conform to is the actual protocol that allows us to handle the purchase state for a transaction. And let's ignore this error for just a second. So that protocol is SK payment. If I can spell payment correctly, transaction observer. And you're going to see an error pop up here again. And if you click it, you'll see it's basically yelling at us because we aren't implementing the two required functions. So hit fix and it'll put them in here automatically for us. So let me copy these and move these down here. And basically the first one is the delegate function that gets called when this product request returns. And this one here is the function that gets called when you initiate a transaction. So let's implement this one first. So we're basically going to check if the response contains our product. So we're going to say if let product equals response.products.first. And notice that products is plural because we could fetch more than one product at a time. So you can check, rather, instead of doing this, you can check the count of products returned. That's usually what I do in my apps when there are more than one products. So in here, we're going to say my product, which is a variable we created up here. We're just going to basically assign my product to the fetched product. And for the sake of this video, let me also print out a couple of things about the product. So the product identifier, the price, the localized title, and the localized description. So like I mentioned, the product actually returns the price as well as the title and description. And that title and description actually map to the given language that the user is using your app in. So if you recall, we can add any language that we want from this list, and I encourage you to do so for a better user experience and also just to get more purchases. So that's the first one. This function is actually a little more interesting. So we want to iterate over each transaction in this updated transactions array. So for transaction in transactions, we're going to switch on the transaction.transaction state. And there's a couple states. So let's do purchasing first. So this state gets called, of course, when the user starts purchasing, and we don't want to do anything here. So we're going to say no op and break. And let's see, this is complaining because, okay, the error went away. So this is complaining because there's a bunch more states we want to handle. So we're going to do purchased and restored. So this gets called once, of course, the user has restored a prior purchase or they purchased something new, aka payment went through, so you should unlock their item. And then, of course, there is failed or deferred. And deferred is basically like the user wasn't able to finish the transaction, so it's still in the queue of transactions to finish, but it's been deferred for one reason or another. This case is very unlikely, so I wouldn't worry about it too much. So what we need to do in these two cases, and also in default, I guess, is we want to actually finish the transaction that we're iterating over, and we also want to remove the observer. So we're going to say sk payment queue default finish transaction, and we're going to also take this and we're going to say remove self, and let's copy and paste this to the failed case also and the default case. And let's see, we want to actually implement the IB action to start a purchase. And to do this, we want to do a couple things. We want to make sure that our product has been fetched. So we're going to say guard let my product equals my product. Otherwise return. And then we're going to say if sk payment queue can make payments. And this basically checks if the current device has an Apple ID signed in, if they have a valid payment, etc., etc. And this is giving us a warning because we haven't used this variable yet. But if we can make payments, we're going to basically create a payment object, which is an sk payment. And you create a payment with the product. And of course, a product is going to be the one that we're unwrapping here. So this warning will go away. And let's see, it should go away. There it goes. So now what we want to do is in sk payment queue, we want to select the default queue. We want to add an observer, which is self. So the current class will handle the transactions that we're about to put into this payment queue. And then we want to add a payment, and that'll be our payment. And that basically does it. So once the user purchases whatever you're selling, you probably want to do something along the lines of this. So let's say they're removing ads. So I would do user defaults, standard, set, and I would set true for ads removed. So obviously I just made this up, but basically wherever you're showing ads in your app, so for example, if that's in the first view controller, let's say we're creating ads in here, I would basically check what the value of this is. So I would say bool for key, and if we haven't removed ads, then basically show ads. Otherwise, of course, we don't want to show ads. And same thing for actually showing the upgrade screen. We don't want to show the upgrade screen if the user has already upgraded and purchased the item, so you probably want to remove that button. But yeah, that's basically how you make in-app purchases. And the other thing I'll mention after we hit Command R to build and run is, unfortunately, you can't actually test in-app purchases on your device. So if we hit this, we get our screen with the lock and the price. And if you look at the console, you'll see that we're printing out the things that we get in the fetch response. So 99 cents is the price that we're getting back. Remove ads is the localized title, and this is the localized description. And this is the ID for the product. And if we actually tap this buy button, you'll see that nothing actually happens because we're on a simulator and we're not capable of making payments on the simulator. So in the buy IB action that we checked, if you recall, we check if can make payments, and of course we can't, so it won't go in here. So to actually test the purchase, you want to deploy to a physical device. Once you have your device connected, it'll show up in here in this list. It'll be the first one, but that's how you can actually test on device. And the other thing I'll mention is if you look in the console, you'll see that it shows 0.99 and there's no indication of currency type in here. So if I recall correctly, there's also a currency object off of this. Or maybe there isn't. I recall there was. So let's see, a product dot price. Let's see. There is definitely a currency somewhere in here. So let's see. There's discounts, content version, is downloadable, price, title, locale. Okay, that's what we want. We want price locale. So if we hit Command R and let's see what we get for price locale, I think it'll give us the $sign, or it'll at least tell us we're in the States. So you'll see that the locale is English, United States currency, and the currency is USD. So you can actually take this locale and convert it into the $sign. So the similar thing would apply for folks that are in Europe for the euro, or Canadian dollars, or Chinese yuan, or whatever currency you're using. So yeah, that's basically how you can set up an in-app purchase. So I know this tutorial was a little all over the place, but just to recap, you need to actually create the product in App Store Connect, which is Apple's portal. And the reason you need to create it here is you need to fetch a product. You can't just create a payment of something that Apple doesn't know about. Then the majority of the code, actually all of it, to make the payment is in this controller. Now notice we're not handling restoring of purchases. That's a little bit of a separate topic. But we first fetch the product via a SK product request. And notice all this stuff is inside of StoreKit. We conform to the delegate and the transaction observer. We created an IB action to actually create a payment and add the payment and observer. And then we have the delegate response for the product request, where we're just printing out the information about the product and assigning it to our local variable. And then finally, we have the function which handles the various transaction states of a given transaction. So that said, that's basically everything I wanted to cover. Hopefully you guys found this video helpful. It's a very bird's eye overview of this process. I'll probably do in-app purchase depth videos for like subscriptions and whatnot. So if you haven't done so already, smash the like button down below. Comment if you have a question, clarification, if you want to see a particular type of in-app purchase video. Cool. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.